All right, so we've all heard that diversification is critical and a buy and hold strategy works. And at a very high level, I would agree with that. However, I'd also say that that's the very beginning. And in general, not what I would consider to be strategic. I think we've got to take things deeper and to a much more thoughtful level to truly have a strategic strategy.
I agree that investment strategy is absolutely critical. Can you walk us through the main components of a sophisticated strategy?
Yeah, I think there's three. Certainly, one could argue there's a lot more, but I mean, for the sake of our conversation today, I think there's three that I would hone in on as an investor and focus on that. So first and foremost, when we're talking strategy, obviously it's an intellectual idea, it's an intellectual concept, and so we've got to start with what is the intellect behind our strategy. And back to what I said earlier, everyone has a strategy. The difference is how well it's thought out. So right from the beginning, investors really need to identify what intellect and whose intellect is guiding their investments. So in today's world, things have gotten so complex. I think it's very challenging, arguably almost impossible, for an individual or even a small group of folks to possess the knowledge across, global markets, numerous asset classes, numerous sectors, as we talked about earlier, geopolitical. So there's just too much, I think, for any one person to really consume and truly be an intellect and strategist on. So I personally prefer and suggest using a high quality institutional grade investment management. So relying on those that have that intellectual capacity to generate and monitor the strategy. Second is diversification. We said it earlier as a starting point, but it is something that needs to be held throughout. So diversification needs to be built into the portfolio. And again, I don't think you can just stop by owning a handful of companies, even if they tend to be really high performing companies or within a singular sector or singular asset class. Typically, I like to see a minimum of 8 to 10 asset classes within a portfolio, and preferably upwards of 10 to 15. And then finally, this is something that's got to be reviewed, and the strategy has to be updated. Again, I think today's world paints this picture really, really well. I don't think anybody out there is sitting there thinking that today's economy and today's markets are the same as they were, simply 24 months ago when COVID and the pandemic started. I think we would all agree that there's been a tremendous amount of change worldwide, and certainly a tremendous amount of change in both the U.S. and abroad economies. So these things have to be reviewed. So setting a portfolio or a strategy up and then just forgetting about it is going to lead to a poor result over time. And the other thing I would point out too, when we're talking about reviewing, I'm not talking about rebalancing. Rebalancing, you hear that term a lot. And what rebalancing means is that you have a strategy, and then over certain periods of time, you go back and rebalance your portfolio to that strategy. So look at what I just said. Imagine having a strategy that was on par in January of 2020, and now rebalancing back to that strategy. It would be completely outdated and off. So when I say review, I really mean looking at a strategy, looking at it every 90 days, and evaluating what's changed in the markets, what's changed in the economy, and are there any corresponding changes that need to be made within the portfolio. I think 90 days is, personally, I think that's the sweet spot. I think monthly is too often. And I think when you start to stretch things out across a year, there's too much change. So I prefer 90 days. I think you get a lot of minor changes to portfolio. It keeps the portfolio more on track, tracking in terms of both performance and risk. So I think those three components, if someone does those well, in terms of intellect and quality of strategy, maintaining broad-based diversification, and actually reviewing the strategy on every 90 days, that'll go a long way to really getting a sophisticated strategy in place.
Marty, you've shared some really valuable information today. Do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share?
Just in general, I think part of it is as adults and, being, investors, I think we all agree, we just have to remember that volatility is always going to be here, and it's always going to be here in both directions, both up and down. And frequency is the key. So forgetting about our portfolio or not looking at our portfolio is not going to be in our best interest. So I really think frequency is the key. And every quarter, I think it's time to reevaluate. And I wouldn't forget the emotional side. I would tell investors, ask yourself, how am I feeling about my investments right now? And just as importantly, how may those emotions bias my decisions? Then look at things from a strategic standpoint and ask what's happening out there, what adjustments should I be making? And then at the end of the day, Erica, there's really just no shortcut to putting in the time and effort to try to get it right.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Marty. It's been really nice to sit down and chat with you about volatility today. To our audience, we appreciate you joining us in this conversation. If you found this information valuable, please feel free to share it with others that may benefit from learning more. If you'd like to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to connect with you.